Hey, Bastish BF for 64K and welcome to another episode of Top 10s.
Welcome to 64K, hosted by Bastish B.
And welcome back. So today's episode is going to be about my personal favorite top 10 Commodore 64 RPGs. Yeah, you're probably thinking, how do you narrow that down to 10? There are just so many. There's games by Origin, Electronic Arts, SSR, Interplay, so many. And that's just a few of the companies that used to make stuff for it. So to narrow this down, I've chosen games that I've already played in the 80s. All these classic RPGs, all my personal favorite ones. Obviously I played a lot more than 10. So there will also be an honorable mention section right before the number 1. As per usual with my videos, there will probably be a little bit more honorable mentions than normal, just due to the amount of awesome RPGs the system has. There were certain RPG companies which I just never ended up coming across games for them, like SSR. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But enough chit chat, let's start this countdown.
Number 10.
So for my first game, I've chosen The Keys to Maramon, released by Minecraft in 1990. This game is first up because it's a great entry-level RPG for anyone. If you're new to the C64 or just RPGs in general, then this game is easy to understand and get into. The game takes place in the same universe as the Magic Candle games, which is also another excellent series worth checking out. The story goes you have to defend Maramon from the night attacks of monsters raiding the town. The game has a day-night cycle, where during the day you get to explore Maramon, talking to the residents, equipping up, visiting bars, etc, etc. But when night descends, you have to go around the town and kill all the monsters that came out of the towers dotted around the town. You'll eventually gain access to these towers to explore as well later in the game. The game feels initially quite small, as it only takes place in this one town, but it's actually packed with content, and the more you start exploring all the buildings and towers, the game greatly opens up. Good graphics and fun action-based battle sequences, tons of items and upgrades to get, and a very easy to understand and play game make this a great game for newbies and something relaxing for veteran RPG fans.
Number 9.
And next we've got Might and Magic 2 Gates to Another World, released in 1988 by New World Computing, known for other great RPG and strategy titles like King's Bounty and the Heroes of Might and Magic series. This game was a massive update of the original and plays a lot like the classic dungeon crawlers like the Bards Tale. Make up a party or import your characters from the first game and head out into the world of Kron. This game sports a massive world with more options for character development and interaction than you usually see in these types of games. Lots of side and main quests. Exploring the land is absolutely fascinating, but the game is very combat heavy. It's all turn-based, but there is a lot of it. Lots of classes of characters also to make, from barbarians to ninjas. In 1991, they also converted the game to the Sega Mega Drive Genesis, which turned out excellently and is a version I probably played the most. So if you have the time to dedicate to it and discover all its many layers, then Might and Magic 2 is going to be a very rewarding game.
Number 8.
For the number 8 spot, I have Buck Rogers and the Countdown to Doomsday by SSR, released in 1990. This game was made during SSR's golden run of RPG output, and is another product based on a TSR board game. As with SSR's Dungeons & Dragons games they were releasing at the time as well. Using the same basic engine as those games for combat, which is turn-based isometric style, it has a lot of other interesting aspects, like space combat and starflight, and a really deep character customization and options, just like you would expect in a D&D game. There are multiple planets to explore, and varied gameplay make this a really fun RPG to sink your teeth into. A sequel was also released for DOS in 1992 called Matrix Cubed, if you're interested in the further adventures in the Buck Rogers universe. There's also a really good Sega Genesis / Mega Drive version of this game that I'd also highly recommend you check out. We have Tangled Tales, The Misadventures of a Wizard's Apprentice, released in 1989 by Origin Systems. So this is the second of 3 games I have chosen for this list. That is another great entry level into 8-bit computer RPG gaming. It's easy to play and understand, and it has a similar gameplay style, at least for the menus, to Origin's other action RPG, Times of Law. As the name suggests, you're an apprentice wizard trying to rise the ranks to a full-blown Gandalf. This game has really nice graphics and an awesome world to explore. The characters are fun and interesting, and the combat is simplified turn-based affair, and overall I think it's a great forgotten Origin gem. It may not have the depth of an Ultima game, but it more than makes up for it with its ease of access and charming characters.
Number 6.
And at the number 6 spot we got the Bards Tale by Interplay and released in 1985 by Electronic Arts. The game was followed by 2 sequels on the Commodore 64, which are admittedly better games, but this was my introduction to the series and maybe even the whole dungeon crawler RPG subgenre as a whole. So this is the one I remember the most fondly. Make a party of 6 and head out and crack some skulls. The entire game is confined to the town of Skara Brae, which has the usual assortment of shops, bars, but all the hardcore action takes place in the secret dungeons and towers that you'll gain access to throughout the game. The game takes place from a first-person view like most dungeon crawlers, and the emphasis on turn-based battles is its main focus, with tons of options and magic and skills to use and discover. The original trilogy recently got a remake treatment on PC, which is excellent, so if you're looking for a modern version of this, then checking that out is highly recommended. This game is pretty tough initially, so check it out if you're up for a good, challenging dungeon romp.
So I just wanted to stop the countdown just for a second here and mention a company called SSR. Now these guys, they made tons and tons of RPGs and strategy war games and simulations actually in the 80s and early 90s, and they were a real powerhouse at it. Now for whatever reason, I never came across a lot of their RPG games back in the 80s. They were kind of hard to find. I played a lot of their strategy war games, but their RPGs just eluded me for whatever reason. You know, stuff like Questron, Eternal Dagger, Shards of Spring, all these kinds of games. I just never came across them. So I don't want you to think that I've ignored SSR's massive library of games. I did, however, play a whole bunch of their Dungeons and Dragons games, which that's probably their most famous franchise they worked on, like, you know, Pools of Radiance and Hillsfar and Gateway to Savage Frontier. That's the reason why some of these games aren't on this list. This is just games I've personally played. Okay, so let's get back to that countdown.
Number 5.
We got the SSR original Gold Box Classic, Pool of Radiance, which is part of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons series and was released in 1988. This was SSR's first Dungeons & Dragons release, and the entire franchise is based on this game, and it does not disappoint. As you saw earlier with Buck Rogers, the same style is applied here, or was created here. Dialogue and character creation with up to 6 party members, first-person view for exploration, and asymmetric turn-based combat is all part of the fun. The story revolves around the town of Flan as it's falling into ruin with the abundance of monster attacks. The town has sent out a call to all adventurers to come and help clean up the town and gain mad cash at the same time. This is a big, time-consuming game, and the battle sequences alone are going to take you a long time to play out. But if you have the time, this is a massively rewarding experience for any true RPG fan. It's no entry level game, but it's definitely worth the effort. You can also pick up the DOS version for this game on GOG for super cheap, and the Forgotten Realms Archive Collection 2 if you want to play it on a modern PC. We got my final entry-level action RPG in Times of Law, released in 1988 by Origin Systems. This game was created by game designer Chris Roberts of Wing Commander fame, and sports some great music as well from C64 Sid Master Martin Galway. Unlike most of the other RPGs on this list, you don't create but choose between 3 heroes, a barbarian, a knight, or a Valkyrie, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. The interface for the game is similar to Tangled Tales, which we looked at earlier, with the exception that all the action takes place in real time, giving the game a bit of an arcade-style feel. The world is massive and is extremely impressive considering there is no disk swapping or major loading after the initial intros. Talking with townsfolk, getting into quests is all pretty easy and makes this game really fun to play. The graphics are really good with their high-res look, and the world is extremely fun to explore. I remember completing this game and loving the whole experience from start to finish.
Number 3.
We have the first time I've ever done this on any of my lists, but I feel this warrants it. It's a tie between two games in the same series, being The Legacy of the Ancients and The Legend of Blacksilver, both created by the brothers Charles and John Doherty for the 1987 and 1988 releases. Let's first take a look at Legacy of the Ancient, which was published by Electronic Arts. This game is a combination of an Ultima style game and a dungeon crawler all rolled into one. You have your overworld where you can visit shops, gamble, play mini games, and then you have the Galactic Museum, which is like a portal to other worlds. This is where the dungeon bashing comes in with its excellent graphics and well thought out world and gameplay mechanics. This game had me glued to my seat for hours on end and is a pretty easy game to get into as well. The follow up to this was The Legend of Blacksilver, and was released through Epix, and the game is a lot less well known than its predecessor due to Epix's demise. The game never got a proper marketing and exposure it deserves, unfortunately. The game's plot has you trying to stop a madman from gaining the mythical material Blacksilver, which could be used in the creation of the ultimate weapon. The game is basically an enhanced version of Legacy with its overworld view and turn-based combat mechanics for the overworld and those excellent looking 3D sequences for all the dungeon bashing. I spent months playing this game and mapping it right to the bitter end, and I have to say it's a fantastically enjoyable RPG that is a must play in any C64 library.
Number 2.
We got Ultima VI, The False Prophet, released by Origin Systems in 1990. This unfortunately was the last Ultima game released on the Commodore 64, but boy did they go out in style. Gone was the old look and style of the previous 5, and this one had a whole new style all on its own. The overworld traveling was gone, and in its place was a closer view of your party and the surrounding, making the game feel a lot more personal. Britannia never felt so massive with its many NPCs and quests to go on, as well as caves and dungeons to explore, which had me lost for months, but in a really good way. It goes without saying that playing the older games is also highly recommended, especially 4 and 5. This was another excellent game by Origin, whose 80s and 90s games output was quite staggering, with so many amazing titles and many on the C64 that didn't even make this list, like Auto Duel, Bad Blood, Mobius, etc, etc. The list is almost endless.
Okay, so we're going to stop here just one last time before the number 1 position, and we're going to check out some honorable mentions. These ones just didn't make the list, but are still well worth playing. Okay, so first up we got a game called Mars Saga. This was made by Westwood and was released by Electronic Arts in 1988. This game is not going to win you over for graphics. It's very kind of mediocre graphics, to be honest. It's very like grey and ugly, but the game is really good. It takes place on Mars. You can go to different cities, travel, you can go to the underground mines, you can go to like turn-based combat, which kind of like you choose all your options and then it plays out and then it goes back to the options, so it's kind of like a turn-based mechanic. It's really good, it's really deep, the character customization and options, and especially when you go into like shops and talk to people on that. This game is definitely not going to be for everybody, but it's definitely worth a look. And next we got Dragon Wars by Interplay. This was released in 1988. This is another one of these massive like kind of first person view Bards Tale like epic adventures. This one takes place in a whole world, you're not just restricted to a town. Character customization is excellent, the world is huge, the combat and the environments are very interesting. If you like some of the other games on the list like Bards Tale and Might and Magic 2, then you're definitely going to like Dragon Wars. Next up is a game called Centuari Alliance, released by Broderbund. It was released in 1990. I only found out about this game a few years ago. I never knew it existed. It's really cool. I haven't played it a lot to be able to determine whether it's a top 10 game. I've played it on and off, and I think it's very cool. It's traditional. It's kind of like reminds me of Buck Rogers that you saw earlier. It's got the first person view. When you go into combat, it goes into this excellent like looking like kind of asymmetric view. Plays out turn-based. Definitely a game that is worth sinking your teeth into. Wish I could get to play it more. I just don't have that much time, but it's definitely a game that's under the radar. Next we got a game called Master of Magic. This was released in 1985 by Mastertronic. This is another one of these entry-level RPGs that I could suggest. It's RPG light, it's kind of like a lot of exploration. It's very different from most RPGs. The combat takes place very quickly. Everything is about moving fast. It's very easy to pick up and play as well, which most RPGs are not. The graphics are pretty good and the music is by Rob Hubbard, so need I say any more? And for the final honorable mention, I've got a game called Hillsfar. This is a part of the Dungeons & Dragons series. This was released in 1989 by SSR. Now this game, as you can see, is a lot more arcade action orientated. It also has obviously tons of RPG elements. So this game is considered a spin-off of the main series. This game is a lot easier to get into than the other Dungeons & Dragons games. So this is another one of these entry-level RPGs that you can definitely give a try. This game has really good presentation and graphics. I really like it. It's definitely a fun kind of a little bit more arcadey RPG action game. And one more quick note here, when I was making this list there were a few other games that were going to appear in the top 10 really epic games, and when I replayed them to capture footage, I decided that a few of these, 3 of them actually, didn't really belong on this list as much as I thought they did. I kind of felt that they belonged on another list all of their own, because they are RPGs in a sense, but they're also space trading games, space trading adventure games. So that's going to be another list in the future. So that's the reason why there isn't games like Sentinel Worlds, Starflight, Space Rogue, brilliant games, and many others. They do have RPG mechanics in a sense, but they also are, I feel like they're just a little bit too much of a different genre, and I really look forward to making that list in the future, so you can look out for those games appearing somewhere in those lists, definitely. Okay, so now let's check out the number 1.
And number 1 is...
And finally, we got the epic that is Wasteland, developed by Interplay and released by Electronic Arts in 1988. This is a post-apocalyptic RPG set in the wastelands of the USA, and is often cited as the basis for Interplay's other epic series, Fallout. Brian Fargo, the director of Wasteland, had worked on previous RPG and adventure games like the Bards Tale series and their criminally underrated Tash Times in Tonetown, and used all that knowledge to produce this gem. We have that good old overhead view for maps and towns with the options and character customizations that are right up there with any of SSR's brilliant Dungeons & Dragons games. An amazing world to explore which you just simply can't stop searching, as you never know what's going to be around the next corner. Excellent turn-based Bard's Tale type combat sequences that seem simple but are packed with tactics. A sequel was also released a few years ago which I helped kickstart and is an excellent play, and is available on all modern consoles, with a recently, as of making this, announced version coming to the Switch as well. Wasteland on the go. Sign me up. Overall, one of the best RPGs on the C64, and it's definitely deserves some of your precious time. You won't regret it.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that little list. I'm Bastish B at 64K. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.